Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, May 10th at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Advancement Live. I'm your host, Andrew Gossen. On today's live broadcast, we are revisiting the topic of digital volunteerism. We have touched on this topic a few times over the past year, and I know that from viewing statistics and from conversations with some of you out there in the audience, that this is a topic in which there is growing interest. And this makes perfect sense. One of the main challenges confronting those of us working with digital in an advancement context has been addressing the perennial question of ROI. Historically, advancement has been trying to mobilize audiences to invest time, talent, and treasure in the institution. And digital volunteerism connects directly to the time and perhaps the talent legs of this tripod, linking digital directly to longstanding and widely accepted advancement business goals. Until recently, most digital volunteering on behalf of educational institutions has taken place in the context of brand advocate or social media ambassador programs, with some additional work taking place in the careers space. The program that we're talking about today, however, takes digital volunteering in a new and exciting direction that I think has the potential to add some real value to educational institutions. But before we get into the details of Columbia Alumni Voices, let me say some quick words of thanks to our sponsors and introduce today's guests. Advancement Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network, offering viewers direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Live broadcasts allow viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in the industry. And all episodes of Advancement Live are free and accessible in the video archives at higheredlive.com and in podcast format on iTunes. Today's live broadcast is made possible by iModules. Get the latest white paper from iModules to learn about online giving trends in higher education, including 24-hour giving campaigns, crowdfunding, average gift size, and more. We have just tweeted out a link that will take you directly to this white paper. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Calling all marketers and storytellers. M. Stoner is offering a free webinar on May 25th on storytelling to recruit students. Led by CEO and co-founder Voltaire Moran, this session explores stories that resonate with prospective students and their influencers. Using an undergraduate admissions experience map as our guide, we'll review 3 examples of stories targeted specifically toward different stages in the admission process. Registration is free, and we are tweeting out a link shortly where you can sign up. iModules and M. Stoner, thank you. We could not do this without your support. Now, let me move on to introducing today's guests. Today, we are joined by Emily Morris and Kenny Chen of the Columbia Alumni Association. Let me introduce Emily first. Over a span of 9 years, Emily has covered recent alumni activities, New York programming, international alumni relations, and most recently, marketing and digital initiatives for the Columbia Alumni Association. In this role, she oversees marketing and communications, digital programs, engagement platforms, and alumni career services benefiting Columbia's 320,000 alumni. She also has experience in the art world, managing commercial and cause-based campaigns with a New York-based arts agency. Personal interests include accessibility and tech, clean design, national parks, and of course, cat memes, and that alone makes her qualified for leadership in the higher ed digital space. Kenny Chen, as Program Coordinator for Marketing and Digital Initiatives at the Columbia Alumni Association. Kenny works on implementing and expanding the broad-based benefits, resources, and digital engagement opportunities made available to over 320,000 alumni of Columbia University. A native New Yorker and lifelong learner, Kenny previously spent 5 years managing digital communications for the Education Department at WNET New York Public Media, and looks forward to discovering something new in the world of digital marketing each day. Emily and Kenny, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Hi.
For those of you who were watching the first time we tried to have this conversation, we are all optimistic that the tech gremlins are going to stay away this time, and that we'll be able to dive into this Columbia Alumni Voices program that I see so much potential in. Kenny and Emily, to start with, where did the idea for Columbia Alumni Voices come from?
So you kindly said that it was a new program in your introduction, and it certainly is new to us, but the idea is very much inspired by a presentation that I heard actually at the conference we were just talking about, the American Marketing Association's Higher Ed Conference. Indiana State University was presenting on their DIY survey panel, which wasn't specific to alumni, and it was very much kind of a different flavor, and they had slightly different goals, but it was incredible findings, like really solid market research. And we took that back and mulled over it for a couple of years and then kind of customized it according to our strategic plan, but very much inspired by them and a couple of other higher ed institutions who are doing this. There's also, you know, in higher ed, we always try to look outside of our own playground, and we've found, especially as we're exploring some different platforms, some really interesting things that commercial companies are doing. You know, there's some car companies who have really interesting online focus groups. Starbucks has a really fascinating portal where people make suggestions around drink concoctions and everything else. So we kind of mashed up all of these things that we've seen working in different areas, and decided to launch our Alumni Voices program.
That sounds great, especially because it seems like one of the habitual problems that we have in advancement is understanding what our audience is interested in based on actual data, as opposed to the suppositions that have served us really well for a long time, let's be fair, but that may not help us target the right content at the right audience and the right channel at the right time in a way we can if we have this more nuanced and detailed and recent information about what they're actually interested in.
Yeah, and I think that was an important goal for us, in that there's lots of ways for all of our institutions to get data-driven insight, and we certainly wanted that from this group, and Kenny can speak a little more to it, but I think one thing that was important to us as well is be able to have very nimble real-time feedback, and I'm going to use a lot of jargony words right now, but we wanted to be able to bootstrap initiatives a little more quickly than I think sometimes happens in a nonprofit or higher ed environment. And so being able to kind of do real-time feedback, being able to prototype different things before we sunk a big investment of time or budget into something, and having this group kind of be on the pulse of what they want to see and what's working has really helped us, I think, launch things more quickly and be able to hit the mark, or at least hit the mark more closely from the start. Mm-hmm. And so that was, I think, key goal, and I think one of the greater benefits that we're seeing from this program, matched with the insight that you're talking about.
So I have a whole series of questions emerging in my head that I would love to dive into right now, but I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. Could we start off by having you walk us through what the program is and how it actually works in practice?
Sure, yeah, actually, and why don't I go ahead and do a bit of a screen share here, because I'm going to take you to our website, our CAA website, where we have a website dedicated to the Alumni Voices panel. So the way it works essentially is we made a call back in July 2015 to all alumni who were interested in volunteering for this panel, which is basically agreeing to opt in to take a survey we would send monthly about a different initiative kind of pertaining to alumni that Columbia was really launching. So to kind of take a first look, here's a look at the overall panel. So we invited all alumni here, and I think the big point that we wanted to stress here was that we wanted a representational coverage of the actual population of Columbia University. So there's 18 schools and partners that are related to Columbia University, and we wanted the percentage of them to kind of reflect what exists in our school. So you'll see that here we have nearly 3,000 members. All the schools are represented proportionally. You can see a number of other details here in terms of the technological capability that they have. So 92% of them have at least a smartphone or a tablet or both. And you can see a couple of interesting things. It spans 6 continents, and there's actually a 66-year difference between our youngest panelist and our oldest panelist. So we really stretch across the spectrum of our audience, and so which has been great for the number of different initiatives that we've been launching to kind of get a good perspective on different age groups, genders, parents, and things like that. So
And what Kenny was just saying was truly important. And our partner in this, Linda Yuri Greenberg, who's the director for market research here in our office, we've learned a lot from her, and very much to have the results and the insights that we're going to get be statistically valid and apply to the initiatives that we want them to apply to. We definitely knew that in our outreach, we had to hit the mark with the right demographics. So in addition to a general call to all alumni, we definitely did different weighted emails, different types of invitations, different targeted different populations multiple times, and others we actually randomized but cut down the list because we knew that they would be maybe more engaged, and we didn't want it to be too weighted one way or another. So even just setting up the panel was very deliberate, and the invitation to alumni really was something.
We're back.
Really was something that we tried to make it kind of as simple and as clear, but also, you heard from us what we wanted to get out of it. We wanted insight. We wanted to be able to prototype things. We wanted to be able to deliver benefits, services, and opportunities that people actually wanted versus than what we were assuming they would. But in terms of so that's what we wanted. But in terms of our invitation to alumni to become a volunteer and help us guide these initiatives through their feedback, one thing that was important is to let them know that their voices would be heard. So we named this Alumni Voices, and very much I think all of our institutions have alumni who are very dedicated and opinionated about this place that's very much a part of them. I think at Columbia, we're New Yorkers here, and so we like to think that maybe our alumni are more opinionated, and we certainly hear from them in all sorts of ways. So we wanted to provide a way for them to really kind of be able to feel heard, not only for us to get insight, but for them to feel heard. So when we were inviting them, we let them know this very straightforward. This is how it's going to work. We'll ask you something every month. But then we've been very careful about reporting back and letting them know, you told us this, and as a result, we did X, Y, or Z.
Right.
And so I think in terms of how it works, that's a really key component is not only kind of getting the ask out there and getting what we want in, but the follow-up. And I think we've seen over time that that's really kept people invested. And a little bit, Kenny can share some interesting statistics about how this program has helped move people along the engagement pipeline. And some people who weren't connected with Columbia before are now some of our most dedicated volunteers because they see that they're really able to participate in a meaningful way.
Yeah. The idea of being heard, but also being able to contribute to that decision-making process and really make a difference in some way, I think has been largely contributed to the success of the program in general. So it's beyond just kind of providing feedback or sharing an opinion about something. It's knowing and getting a regular report a month later about what they said and how that contributed to something that we actually carried out or performed. So yeah, I think that's really been a key success factor for us.
Yeah, one of the things I've been most impressed with looking at the website is the way you've taken some of the feedback and turned it into content in the form of those infographics. And it feels like that's not only an effective piece of stewardship for the people who have invested time in doing this, it's also a nice piece of content you can use to respond to the habitual complaints about why do I only hear from you when you want money? And here you've got really good evidence that that is in fact not the case, that there are plenty of opportunities to help shape the direction of alumni affairs at Columbia that have nothing to do with money, although money is always nice.
That's a great point. We haven't started responding because I think all of us in higher ed, we do hear that from the occasional alums, and we haven't started responding that way, but I like that. Maybe we'll start sending them a very pointed direction to the website.
Is there a particular piece of software or a platform that you use to run the program?
Yeah, we use a software called Qualtrics in combination with some companion software called Target Audience, which is it's managed by the same group in Qualtrics. But what Qualtrics allows us to do is create surveys. So it's kind of what you would be normally use to create any kind of survey, but and collect results, but target audience takes it a step further, and by allowing you to have kind of a recurring panel. So that's really what the basis of Alumni Voices was to create this panel where they would take kind of an initial survey and let us know their kind of general demographics information and things like that.
Interest-based information.
Yeah, and what they're interested in, and that's kind of the baseline information that we have on them that we can kind of track throughout the rest of the surveys that we give them. So they all get a unique survey link that Qualtrics and target audience allows us to do, and yeah, it all really just allows us to keep track of, you know, what group is answering the most surveys or what group isn't, and things like that. So it allows us to kind of look deeper into the data that goes beyond something like an anonymous survey. So I think that's really been a huge factor for us and it's been great using that software. I think it's really allowed us to do certain things and export that data in a much more digestible way.
We can even, I mean, we're gonna get really, and by we, I mean Kenny, are gonna get really like down and dirty with the data. We're gonna take a little bit of summer hiatus at the end of this academic year, but I think it'll be fascinating to be able to draw conclusions about things that aren't necessarily like assumed causal effects. So, you know, someone who might have, you know, answered 3 things, you know, across the course of the year in a certain way, will be able to kind of cross-reference that with their interest levels and their school affiliations and all sorts of kind of like really get like a 360-degree view, and also hopefully learn things that isn't just the insight that they gave us from completing one of the surveys, but also more like general trends about what type of person gravitates towards what type of thing. So I think the platform is very nuanced in that way.
So you've used words like agility, prototyping, rapid response, opportunities. These are all words that I personally find very compelling, but I'm aware that there are sometimes pockets in advancement organizations where they don't respond quite the same way. Could you tell us a little bit about how you presented this concept to your organization and what the responses were?
Yeah, so Columbia is a very complex place in that Kenny and I are representing the university-wide Alumni Association, but there's 18 different schools, and all of them have alumni associations or endeavors. And so very much everything that we do on the university-wide level, we want to be of service and helpful to everyone, but also acknowledge that we can't necessarily customize broad-based or university-wide programs for different niche needs, because we would just never get anything off the ground. So what we did in this case is, you know, we really crafted the concept, and then we presented it to many different stakeholder groups. But one thing that was helpful is we had, you know, we kind of had an internal FAQs that we distributed pretty widely, and we really just tried to lay out, you know, this is what it's going to do, this is what it's going to do for all of us on a university-wide level, but also this is what it's not going to do. You know, while we will be able to have insight into different schools, alumni's responses and how they're gravitating to different things, we're not going to be able to deploy different like school-based things. You know, everything that we're asking this particular group needed to happen on a level that could be applicable to any alum, no matter what generation or what part of the university they came from. I think the largest concern was specifically that, you know, like why can't I find out something specific to my school using this tool? And we just had to be very clear that, you know, there's different tools and different initiatives that do different things. And this is, you know, this is very much a broad-based university-wide. I think for the most part, you know, the idea of digital volunteers is something, especially with this sort of thing, which it is an ongoing commitment, but it's something that fits into our concept of what we're calling micro-volunteering. And that we're not asking people to serve on a board or come to like 2-hour committee meetings or, you know, staff an event for 3 hours or anything like that. It's very much, you know, 5 minutes once a month. And so I think because this is a relatively new space and we have a couple of other digital volunteer programs, but for the most part, it's not already saturated with a lot of asks. And I think that helped clear the way internally that, you know, we weren't going to distract someone from another part of the university or something that they're already engaged with. You know, this is very much a value add, and it's on the user's terms. And I think, you know, internally everyone's been very supportive. I think, you know, just as we find is really important and also incredibly helpful to share back the insights of what we've learned, but also what we're doing about it with the actual participants. It's been equally important internally. I think we've been able to get some things done without necessarily, by being able to like back up the concept before we even begin. And I think that's helped us really launch some things. And we can tell you about some of the initiatives we've done this year that have very much been driven by the insight we've gotten.
Yeah, I think, staff definitely have been very supportive once we got the program going. I think the idea of having really an ever-ready kind of focus group dedicated to answering questions about a particular initiative that we're interested in that month or we're leading up to launching, I think that's been a huge factor for us. And I think being and having that group really has allowed us to work with different departments within our alumni unit. So we work with communications and development, depending on what the topic is, you know, potentially fundraising as well. And so those are all topics, and that allows us to kind of collaborate together in a great way. So in terms of that, the staff has been really on board with this program as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think this micro volunteering is actually incredibly important. It feels like over time, our conventional volunteer rules have been less and less relevant to the pace and the style of today's lifestyle. And certainly here at Cornell, we've been thinking about what we're calling done in a day volunteer opportunities. The notion there being that you're not committing to any sort of long-term officer role in the conventional sense, and you can sign up and you can go and you can volunteer with Habitat for Humanity with a bunch of fellow Cornellians or something analogous to that. And I think digital is really making volunteer opportunities even more user-friendly and open to anybody out there, regardless of how much time they have. So I guess a question, are you seeing a lot of overlap between the people who you already had participating in some of your other digital volunteer opportunities and this? Or is the fact that you've chosen this audience so carefully, does that mean that it's hard to tell how much overlap there may be organically?
That's a great question. I think initially, as our pilot phase, we launched a couple of things publicly to our broad-based audience. We mentioned our master's program as well earlier, and this was another one of them. I think for the pilot phase, at least, there hasn't been a ton of overlap. But again, that kind of goes back to how we really wanted the representational audience based on the actual reflective population of Columbia University. So we targeted the schools a little bit, and yeah, I wouldn't say there's a ton of overlap, but I think going forward we would definitely see that kind of overlap, especially for those interested in that micro volunteering that we mentioned before. Those that find that a lot easier, I can see there being a lot of overlap in terms of you know, wanting to volunteer in that way. So they'd probably be a part of our ambassadors program as well as this Alumni Voices program, something that allows them to volunteer on their terms. So I haven't seen a lot of that yet, but can definitely we'll keep track of it, and expect actually in the future as we iterate on these programs going down the line, I think we should expect to see a lot more overlap now.
I think one interesting thing is we have a large number, and I don't remember off the top of my head, maybe you do, of people who were previously unengaged. And so the number of our 2,955 members, the proportion of that were previously unengaged, is much larger than we see in other volunteer opportunities. So definitely, like Kenny mentioned, we're hoping that this is a first step on the engagement pipeline, or, you know, it's the gateway that will hopefully keep them involved in other things.
Yeah, that was actually one of the questions as we were mentioning, kind of how we knew that they were unengaged to begin with. That was one of the questions we asked them on the initial survey. So in addition to the demographics and you know, where they live and all that information and their age, we also wanted to keep track of how they felt about engagement with Columbia, how they personally, how the volume of connection that they felt with Columbia, and that's how we knew that initially at the start of the program, they weren't so engaged, but now they've all of a sudden taken a number of surveys, or 90% of the surveys that we've sent out. And so that gives them an opportunity, and that's a clear kind of indication of those who initially felt unengaged, but now after this program have become all of a sudden one of the top survey takers as part of this program. And so we're hoping that'll be a jump off point as well into other micro volunteer opportunities.
I think also we're seeing people, as we're asking them for insight on these things that we want to launch or that, are already running, I think we're seeing people really feel a little more invested in them because they have created them, they have shaped them. It's a for you, by you concept. One of those, if we can just take a minute, we'll tell you about our very first survey was asking, I think as so many of us in higher ed, we were transitioning from a legacy alumni directory to a new vendor and a new platform for an alumni community. And before we even started to go live and bring in our early adopters, we asked this group to help us shape and design the community. So they gave various input around design elements. They helped craft the look and feel. They chose the name. They chose the kind of the most mainstream option we threw out there, which is Columbia Alumni Community. And so as what we saw from that, and there's more details if Kenny wants to talk about them, but we only recently kind of revisited with the same group. Now that we have launched this community that they helped design, we've asked them to go back and help us iterate some additional changes, make some suggestions, give us feedback on it doesn't meet their expectations based on what they were initially asked, but also help us think through future functionality that we would build. And I think that was the most full circle experiment that we've done.
Yeah, I mean, literally the first survey we sent was about this community, and that was before we even really had kind of a demo or even a beta site to show them. And so they really paved the way for what it looks like, what it's called, some of the resources that were interesting to them, that they most wanted to see in the next iteration. So we took that, and so now our last survey was kind of really revisiting that concept. And I think that speaks to another really huge benefit of having a panel like this, is being able to ask questions now to the same group that gave you responses from 7 months ago. And so that's a clear way to really measure how they felt about the project in the onset, and then now how do they feel about it now that we have something to show them, and how they've really shaped some of the aspects of what they're seeing. That's another case of really kind of a win for us, being able to track tangible wins for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is exciting to me, because I feel like very often we fall into the trap of feeling like we need to have alumni volunteers because we've always had alumni volunteers, and those roles have become less and less meaningful as we've increased our staff sizes and professionalized and so on and so forth. There are obviously some exceptions to that, but I think that holds true as a general trend. And this feels like the exact opposite of a purely ceremonial volunteer role, in that you're helping shape the tools that you're using to engage the rest of the alumni community. And I love that, not just because of the direct impact that it actually does have that you can share with your volunteers, but then I'm sure you also occasionally get the calls that I get from an angry alum who wants to talk about how everything that you thought about something you just launched is wrong, and basically what the heck is wrong with you. And if you've got this data indicating that you actually checked in with not one but 3,000 of this person's peers, that kind of pulls the fang on that critique pretty effectively.
Yeah, great point. And I think that's part of the transparency too, and why we posted all of the results, even though cleaned up in an infographic form, but why we post them all publicly, et cetera, is exactly to have that sort of transparency and be able to show this is very much an alumni driven, whatever the initiative at the moment is very much an alumni driven.
Yeah, definitely. And we share the results not only with the panel themselves, but I mean, as you saw, we have all those infographics posted publicly on our Columbia Alumni Association website. And so it's really meant for the entire alumni audience. So even if you didn't contribute a response to that particular initiative we're talking about, that's something that's information that's helpful for you as an alum to really see and kind of feel informed about what's going on with the CAA. So, so yeah, it's been huge for us to kind of get out there for our broad audience.
It seems like it could be useful with internal audiences as well, because alumni affairs and development being what it is, you tend to have some people who've been around for 30 years, and you bring up a new idea and they say, oh, we tried that back in 1975 and it's never going to fly. And once again, if you've got more recent data with a current representative set of your population, that I think gives you a much stronger basis from which to argue for trying something new than you'd have otherwise.
And you know, the flip side of that is it has allowed us to kind of abandon some ideas that we thought were really good, but we heard back that this wasn't resonating with our panel, and so we stopped pursuing them. There were a couple of affinity programs and benefit ideas that we were kind of keen on, just among us. And we had started conversations, but then we learned that our alumni were actually much more interested in different offerings. So we're being able to kind of pivot and not overly invest or waste our time in one area that it turns out was not of interest.
Yeah, it's been huge for us for like repositioning and being able to reposition. I think going in knowing that we're not just doing this for show, we're not just having you tell us what you feel and we're going a certain way anyway. There have been cases that we've kind of shifted our focus because of what this panel has told us and told us what they're interested in or what they want to see the most. So, so yeah, it's really allowed us to be nimble in that regard.
And it sounds like that's a major argument you would want to make going up the food chain to make the case that you need to try this, because if you can avoid spending a lot of money on something that's not going to work by doing this kind of research up front, what sort of senior leader worth his or her salt is not going to be receptive to that kind of argument.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, this reminds me a lot of a really interesting article I read about crowdfunding maybe a year ago, and the point that it was making was that crowdfunding is cool in terms of getting projects funded, but it also can be incredibly cost effective for larger firms to develop a sense of how much of a market there actually is for something that they're considering. So just initial sort of taking the temperature of the market and early prototyping, and if it turns out that it flops, maybe you've lost a certain amount of time and money, but much less than you would have if you'd actually gone through a development process and spun up a production line and done the marketing without having this early warning that maybe the audience isn't as into you as you thought they might be.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the process whereby you decide what types of questions you're going to ask?
That's another great question. As I mentioned before, we collaborate closely depending on what the survey topic is. We'll collaborate differently. So for something for communications would be different from something with development or fundraising. But more or less, we do get responses and feedback internally from our marketing and communications team, who are kind of specialized in that market research standpoint. So, and this is something that I've been learning as well, managing the program, is really making sure that you're not putting leading questions in and really making sure that you randomize answers and really things that might potentially skew your data. And so we've been getting pretty good at that. We will start off potentially, if it's an idea that starts off with a different group, we'll kind of collaborate with them and we'll have a meeting and kind of come up with the goals of what you want to find out from the survey. And we'll start that off, and then we'll take that information and really flesh that out into survey questions that would make sense. And we also have to think about what the experience would be for the actual survey taker, whether or not it's, we don't want to send them a 5-page survey with 50 questions and things like that. So those are all pieces that kind of go into the process. Statistical accuracy and making sure we're not kind of skewing things, but also making sure that the questions pertain to something that leads to a goal or an answer that would be helpful for us.
Before we even launched this, before the invitation went out, we already had a pretty long wish list of things that just institutionally we know we want to know. Some of those are based on like a timely moment. For example, our Columbia Giving Day is in late October. And so we knew in November we would want to follow up with a fundraising theme to be able to get some insight about awareness and in resonance of Columbia Giving Day, but also about some other fundraising initiatives. I mentioned the community, and we had a roadmap for that laid out with key moments. So we know sometimes where we're going to slot a certain theme in. Other times, our colleagues will come to us. We have one going out shortly about actually about volunteering. It's very meta. And so that one, I think, was something that we knew we would do it at some point this year, but we weren't really sure when. So it was dependent on our partner to be ready internally. And so I'm looking at our initial wish list here, and we definitely didn't get to everything. There aren't enough months in the year. But I think, and then there's been a couple of times where we've actually kind of adjusted what we thought we were going to do based on like a more urgent need.
Right.
And so I think how we decide what to do, it was like half known and half unknown. But just like the program itself, we try to be nimble about it.
Start to finish, how long does it take you to go from concept to execution with one of these surveys?
I would say probably 2 weeks has been the average, sometimes less than that. It's really, once you have the initial meeting or discussion about what you want to accomplish with the survey, and again, that also reflects on the number of questions when we try to limit ourselves to kind of building these surveys out to. So that it's a shorter survey, and that's by design, just because we want, if people are agreeing to take this monthly, we don't want to inundate with them with huge surveys. But so in terms of the number of questions and just the overall goals and kind of fleshing that out, I would say, yeah, close to like a week to 2 weeks. And which has been great for us in terms of timeline, because we send these every month. We also try to summarize the results and get that out publicly as well. So the timeline makes sense for the monthly sends, that we have the next one ready, and we also have the results from the previous survey to go out publicly.
And it seems like with that kind of regularly scheduled every month distribution of a survey, if something pressing does come up, you can move fast enough that you can actually get almost real-time feedback on something that just emerged as a priority. And that's got to be another real selling point, I would think, for hires up, just having this capacity to respond on a dime, so to speak.
Yeah, it's interesting that one application of this type of program that I feel we might do, and we haven't yet, is to kind of use it to get feedback, or just to get take the temperature of things around like crisis communications or like timely issues that don't all have to be positive. And I think that could be a really interesting application. As an institution, we have decided not to do that so far. But I think that could bring tremendous value to us internally, but also to help provide almost like a siphon for people who are very opinionated about something. It gives them a place to be heard. Whereas I think that we don't collectively always have a very satisfying response. We might have talking points that we distribute or something, but we don't always invite voice, certain types of voices. So that's maybe a future thing to explore.
Yeah.
Can we tell you about a couple of results? Show you some of these infographics?
Sure, please.
Great. So let's go back. I'll do the so again, all of the results that we sort of released, and that comes out monthly, and that's all found on this one page that's open to all alumni, especially the panel who really contributed to this. And so going back to the start of this, and back in August, this was really the first, and this is something we mentioned before about our the first survey, which was about the community that, again, we hadn't launched yet, but it was a concept, and we had ideas of what we wanted to accomplish with it. And so these are some high-level results, and the infographics themselves will reflect more of the high-level results, but you'll see here that they not only named it, they also contribute to the resources and the features that they most wanted to see, not only the ones that existed currently, but what they wanted to see in the future. And they also kind of weighed in on the design. So we had, and that's another thing that I should mention about Qualtrics, and And the survey building tool is really nice to be able to include visuals, and that's something we try to mix up. We try to make the surveys as fun as we can, and so in this particular survey we had actual visuals and mock-ups of what the community would look like and what images really resonated with them the most.
I'll show maybe the store.
Oh yeah, and yeah.
Andrew, before you had mentioned that crowdfunding can serve as a way to decide like what products to take to market, and we're actually opening, quote unquote, an online store with just like CAA or alumni centered designs.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was actually perfect because we knew we had an initial, investment nut, and we had to make some decisions about what sort of things we were going to invest in. So this really helped us decide what to do, but also to be able to build a business model around our store based on what people told us about their spending habits, their likelihood to, wear different things. They all choose some designs. And so that was definitely kind of more almost like commercial application of using this group. But very much so, one of the things that Indiana State did when I heard them speak of, they sent all of their participants, like I think it was a Starbucks gift card or, some nice thank you gift at the end of their period, their survey period. And so we're actually hoping, once again, kind of like the community where we close that loop with a follow-up survey, we're hoping to kind of follow up with them as we're about to launch and give them a little something special from the store that they helped design. What else? What else is a good one?
The benefits and discounts is a great example of something that really applies to all alumni and what alumni have access to in terms of benefits and services and things like that. So a number of them have told us really what they wanted to see, and really to kind of test the waters, we wanted to find out what benefits they were even aware of. And so we've been learning that a number of alumni have just not been aware of what is being offered or what is available to them. And so that was kind of a huge eye-opener for us, as well as really what they really wanted to see in the future. I think this is kind of, this speaks to things that they really helped refocus us on, which are the top benefits that, are being considered that they would be interested in. And then the first one, number one, by far, with 72%, was really a news or magazine or subscription discount. We're finding that our group is a very literary kind of group, and they want to be in the know and involved in the news and be more aware of that. And so that has been kind of led us to partnerships with trying to really find out ways we can leverage that, as well as car rental discounts, which we've learned, which is a nice insight for us in the local area, at least. Car rental discounts in New York City would be a huge benefit for them that they were interested in. So.
And what this has allowed us to do is, I mentioned before, we were kind of thinking about some other affinity programs. It turns out those did not resonate, but we learned these two things, and there were some write-in suggestions that were really interesting too. But as a result, we have been able to pursue a conversation with New York Times, and we have also gotten Zipcar, which services the students and staff on campus, to open up their offerings to alumni as well. So, very much we were able to kind of take action based on this, and it also helped us refine our marketing strategy, in that we became aware that people were not aware of certain things that we thought were pretty self-evident. So we're seeing how we can kind of surface those more in different communications when they line up with what people want but didn't know about.
Yeah, and it seems like not only are you figuring out what people are not aware of, and therefore you can direct some spotlights on those, but it's also telling you what works, right? Because clearly there are some things that people are widely aware of, and that would then put you in a position to sort of think of it like, in a weird way, sort of an A/B test with your marketing about benefits, and that clearly some things are having more of an impact than others. And what I love about all of this is that you're actually, once again, doing work that delivers actionable business intelligence or data that's important to both the operation side of things as well as the user side of things. and just using your time and your investment in digital efficiently to impact user experience and bottom line in a way that I think is the way we have to be working in the future.
Yeah, totally great.
So it feels like there are success criteria that relate to what you get out of each individual survey. How do you think about the question of measuring success for the initiative as a whole?
So, we have our standard metrics and KPIs in terms of the level of engagement, and we have, we want a certain proportion of this 3,000 group to be engaged in terms of taking at least half of the surveys or more.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking, I think long term, we'll do kind of some back-end database work about how people continue to be engaged. So, if they did this, have they given, do they then come to an event? Are there future steps that we can, even if it's just a light causal effect, assume some causal effect. So I think that the success of the program, in addition to giving us what we wanted in terms of insight and guidance in terms of our initiatives, is very much we want to see how this plays out in terms of that engagement pipeline. I think we're also very interested in understanding if, like I think you mentioned, Andrew, if this is going to open the door to more digital volunteerism. I know Cornell has really done an incredible job establishing a culture of volunteerism and volunteer-led initiatives, and we are very much thinking along those lines as well, where we see the Alumni Association not as being, a staff in the building, but really being, led by peers. We're here to support. So I think that we hope to continue this program, and we're going to kind of be doing some new iterations, I think, in the coming year, but also seeing what has worked here and what we can do, what we can do more of in terms of opening up new digital volunteer opportunities. This was a year-long commitment that we asked this group to honor. I think in the future, some things that we're thinking about are, could we have just maybe less of a membership-driven, but more of like an online forum or kind of just ongoing focus group where, people can it can take a bunch of different forms, and we're not quite sure what it will be. Would it be like that Starbucks one that I mentioned, where it's basically a very cool interactive suggestion box, more or less, and people can upvote and downvote? Can we do things like that? We're talking a lot about micro mentoring. We have a online speed networking regular virtual event that we do, and we're thinking about, is this group totally different? Is the way they want to engage just to share their opinion, or do they also want to connect and give back? And I think, it's never black and white, but I think there's probably different motivations, and we can maybe connect the dots for some people who aren't finding other volunteering opportunities on their own, and just kind of keep them really kind of giving back in their own way, which to them is not necessarily, I think, the same motivation as philanthropically giving back, although for some it probably is. But really, they have an opinion, and they are willing to share it and to help build things with us. And so how can we think about that motivation and maybe taking it from the micro survey level to maybe, larger efforts? Did that answer your question? I think I went on a bit on that one.
You absolutely did. And you actually anticipated another question I had, which was, where do you see this in 3 years or 5 years? And it sounds like you've got some ideas, but you're going to base it on experience that you've gathered over this past year, and then how people respond to some of the tweaks that you're going to make in the future. I do have a question that relates to the sort of alumni engagement index idea, which for those of you in the audience who may not be familiar with that, that's a way of trying to calculate what percentage of your alumni base is engaged during a particular year-long span, or 3 years or 5 years. And as you think about who you count as a sort of legit volunteer for Columbia, does this fall into that metric?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that, because on here at Columbia we have a system called ALMA. Like so many things around here, it's an acronym. It stands for Alumni Lifetime Metrics Analysis. And so there's 4 different areas, and it's a point-based system. And this certainly, people get a point when they signed up for being a digital volunteer. We have a category for that. But then there's also, they get a point for having answered a certain number of surveys. So we kind of measure two things in terms of that engagement measurement. One, did they like raise their hand to volunteer in the first place? And then two, it is more reflective of how active a volunteer they are.
Right. Makes total sense. We're nearing the end of our hour. For people in the audience who may be thinking that this sounds like a great idea and they'd like to explore it in greater detail, what are some initial steps that you would recommend that they take to learn more about the concept and its implementation, and begin to figure out if and how it might work for them?
There are a couple of white papers around, and if anyone is, I will have to dig them out of my files. I don't know if they are actually on the Google or not, but if anyone's interested, feel free to email me or Kenny. I guess.
Yeah, I would say just from my point of view of having kind of really to work with building the surveys and collaborating to really get them publicly sent out and building the panel and all that, I'd say one is to make sure that the panel is kind of representational based on who you're trying to really survey. So, if you only want or considering a particular school, make sure that your panel reflects that. Another thing I think I brought up before was we always try to make it fun. We try to think of the actual user experience of alumni who take the surveys, and we do want them to come back, and we want them to use it as a jump off point to other opportunities, whether it's on more micro volunteering or larger base volunteering. But we want to make it appealing to them as well, and still get something out of it. I would also, and this is something I don't think we really talked about, but is incredibly important, is to make sure, again, we started with wanting to make sure our alumni felt heard and make sure that their voices were being listened to by someone. So sometimes you'll get responses or you'll get direct emails kind of with points or asking questions, and it's really important to be readily available to kind of respond to those and to make sure that you're kind of addressing that. And you don't want, I think one of the worst things you can do is to just be radio silent on any inquiries you get, especially if you provide an email. If you want to get in touch with us, make sure that someone's monitoring that email and really responds in a meaningful way. And so we try to be really good at that, of responding as soon as we get inquiries or questions or even negative comments or anything like that. It's important to really make sure that they're being listened to.
I think, Kenny had mentioned our partner in crime, who's the market research person here. And having someone like that as a partner has been very invaluable. Kenny has mentioned several times how, crafting the surveys is both a science and an art. And I think in order to make sure that we're getting the right sort of insights, we need to make sure we're asking the right questions in the right way. And so having a partner like that, I think is incredibly helpful for anyone who's thinking about doing this. And if you don't have someone like that on your, as a colleague, there might be someone in your alumni population who could advise. And so I think having a resource like that is a great thing to get started.
And even if you can't find someone in your alumni population, it seems like if most of us are at colleges and universities, you've got statistics departments, various different social sciences and physical sciences that rely heavily on survey work and statistical analyses. And obviously it's not a direct one-to-one correlation between that type of survey work and market research, but it's a heck of a lot better than nothing, right?
For sure.
Great point. I forgot about our brilliant students and faculty on campus. Yeah.
Sure. It's amazing how easy it is to forget that we've got people studying the exact same stuff that we're working so hard to figure out. Well, Kenny and Emily, thank you so much for spending this hour with us. This has been incredibly interesting. I know I've learned a lot, and I've got some notes here that I've taken that I will be bringing up with my boss in the not too distant future. I hope those of you in the audience have found this to be similarly useful. I really do think that this is an exciting new way that we can leverage the time and the effort of our volunteers on behalf of our institutions in ways that serve them and that serve us. It's a win-win situation, and that's what we're always after. With that, I'm going to draw things to a close. Thanks, as always, to our program sponsors, iModules and M. Stoner. My partner in crime, Kim Brown, will be back in a couple of weeks with a show on engaging new alumni. And with that, once again, I'd like to say thank you to Kenny and Emily, and we will talk to you next time on Advancement Live. Thank you.